You're back, everyone. You're welcome back. Well, you are welcome back. Of course, you are, everyone. To a third installment. Lucky you, eh? We've got back-to-back episodes, and we're back with our third and final one for the afternoon, Friday here, with David Pyne, who is an expert on many different things related to conflict. David, you've got quite an interesting background, being a former U.S. Army combat arms and staff officer, and I think, this is in 12 hours time. This would have been exactly 6 months since the war in Iran started. Or is it next week? No, I'm pretty sure it's this week. Hang on, double checking the date.
Okay, next week. Yeah,
it's next week. Okay. Well, happy almost 1 week before a 6 months anniversary of the Iran war, everybody. Possibly the stupidest conflict in recent memory. But David, I mean, how do you see it with all that rather fluffy introduction done?
Hey, Pyotr, thanks for having me on your show. Yeah, this is absolutely the stupidest war that the U.S. has ever fought. I mean, I thought it was Iraq, but it's so much worse. There's just and there's no sensible argument why we should have entered the conflict. It's been a complete disaster, certainly politically for the Republican Party. Economically, we're on the verge of a global recession coming up here probably later this year. Potential depression if the U.S. naval blockade continues and the war continues into next year. Next summer. And then it's also been a disaster militarily and geopolitically for the United States, because the United States has essentially been exposed as impotent in terms of the U.S. military inability to defeat what is essentially a second-rate great power, certainly a near-peer competitor. But basically, Iran is demonstrating every day that they have essentially replaced the U.S. as the regional dominant power in the Persian Gulf region. We can't send a single manned combat vessel in the Strait of Hormuz, despite the fact that President Trump continues to claim that we control it. The strait is open. I mean, obviously, all the facts belie that. The traffic for oil tankers and other ships transiting the Strait of Hormuz is about 5 to 7% of what it was pre-war in terms of pre-war levels. And it's really served as essentially a green light for potential international aggressors, primarily communist China, to invade Taiwan, because this war is very similar to the kind of war that we would see with the U.S. and China fought over Taiwan. If it's essentially more of an air and sea war. It's a drone and missile war. Basically, the side with the most drones and missiles, the most munitions, is the side that has become victorious. And we saw that with Iran. But it also shows that, great powers and nuclear great powers, as I assess, Iran is likely to be, can really dominate their region with the anti-ship missile supremacy that Iran has over the U.S. They have hypersonic anti-ship missiles. They have anti-ship ballistic missiles that we don't have. We don't even have supersonic anti-ship missiles. So all of our anti-ship missiles are essentially subsonic. They're very dated and essentially 1950s or 60s or at best 70s technology. And Russia and China and Iran completely outmode us in terms of that level of technology when it comes to hypersonic missiles. We do have some hypersonic missiles coming online, but late to task, I would say.
So, okay, so quite a lot there. So you're to paraphrase you, you're simply saying that the Iranians have now become the de facto regional hegemon in the Middle East, unparalleled.
Not in the Middle East, no. Israel certainly is dominant in the Western Middle East, and then Iran is more dominant in the Eastern Middle East. And of course, Pakistan is a neighboring country, and so Pakistan obviously has a lot more nukes than Iran likely has right now. And so they have kind of their own sphere of influence that is, coexisting with Iran's. But the thing with Pakistan is that both Iran and Pakistan are members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which Russian President Putin has rightly described as a second Warsaw Pact reborn, essentially. So it is not just a economic alliance and security alliance. It has the potential to be a military alliance as well. And of course, Russia has a separate defense pact with Iran. It has a separate defense pact with North Korea. But essentially, Iran is the reason our blockade is not working is because Iran is surrounded by friendly countries. Essentially, Iraq is very friendly with Iran. Pakistan is as well. 6 of their 7 neighbors, they have very strong economic and trade relations. It's only Azerbaijan that they don't, and of course some of their Gulf neighbors across the Persian Gulf.
Yeah, I mean, look, on the one hand, I think we can say that this is the stupidest war in recent memory. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the other side is scot-free of challenges either. Wouldn't you agree that the relationship that the Iranians, Chinese, Russians have is one more of convenience than necessarily lifelong friends? I think it's been clear the Chinese are not willing to get too supportive or involved. They're supplying Iran with certain arms, but couldn't they do more? Shouldn't they be doing more if this is a deeper relationship here?
Well, I think the relationship between China and Iran is one very similar to the U.S. and Ukraine. The U.S. has provided lots of intelligence, both offensive and defensive intelligence, satellite targeting information. We provided, a huge amount of armaments. Certainly, China could provide a lot more arms, but really, I think Iran has almost all the arms they need to fight and win this war against the United States. So I think, China is providing them the weapons they need. They actually gifted them a satellite that enabled them to very precisely target and destroy about 13 U.S. military bases neighboring Iran. They've helped Iran deliver a devastating blow to the U.S. And of course, Russia's provided, upgraded Grand missiles that, of a type that Iran gave to Russia that are much more advanced in terms of, AI capabilities and GPS targeting accuracy. So, I think just as we've essentially used Ukraine as essentially cannon fodder to try and fail to weaken the Russian Federation. I think that's essentially what China and Russia are doing to us. Of course, the main difference is, Ukraine has lost over 1 million soldiers dead and another million severely wounded. But we've only lost about 18, at least according to official figures, because we haven't really had a ground war component. And that's certainly a very good thing, because otherwise, if we were to launch a full-scale ground invasion of Iran, it could reach Vietnam type casualties in terms of thousands or even tens of thousands of dead and wounded U.S. soldiers.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even bother really asking or going into that sort of avenue, really. To be honest, it's not going to happen, and any threat of Karg Island annexation, occupation. Where's the imminent ground operation from the Kurds with support of US, aerial strikes and so on, right? It's all preposterous. What I do think is more pertinent, though, now is that the Trump administration seems to be reverting to economic pressure. This all-out economic collapse that they're saying the Iranians are about to experience, even though we've tried that for the past 8 years, 8 maximum pressure, and we're still here. So why do you think the Trump administration are doing it this time? And what do you think what's different about this time, do you think, according to the Trump administration? I'll put it that way.
Yeah, great question. So the problem with this war is that President Trump started the war without a strategy for success. There was none of the 6 objectives that he outlined for the war have been achieved. None of them were actually achievable the only way we could defeat Iran militarily is with use of nuclear weapons, and reportedly that is something that Trump has stated, has considered repeatedly. I don't think he's going to pull the trigger on that. I think there's enough level-headed folks in the cabinet and certainly General Kane to talk him out of that. But it's a situation where Trump has essentially been making up Iran war policy on the fly. Every day, he'll try different things, but ultimately there's no military solution. I was saying this before the war, and I was criticized for doing so. I briefed some high-level folks and said there's no military solution to the Iran nuclear issue. It has to be the only solution we have is diplomatic. Iran was offering us, the day before the war, they had a comprehensive nuke deal that would constrain their nuclear program, and Trump foolishly rejected that and decided to go to war with them. But just anyone, I think, that has a background in military history and understands the geography and the balance of power in the region understood that this was going to be an unwinnable war from the start. And in fact, all of the evidence indicates that President Trump was briefed by General Kane and another one of his the director of the Joint Staff, who was subsequently fired, a vice admiral, that this war, our aims were likely to be unachievable. That this could have, it would quickly mushroom into a regional war, would deplete our military capabilities. They'd close the strait. There'd be a lot of economic blowback, and essentially we would be unsuccessful. And there was a 0% chance, really, of affecting regime change in Iran or getting the Iranian people to rise up and take over the government. There's just no real organized armed opposition to Iran that's in any way effective, that has the capability to do that.
No, and I think, David, what's quite remarkable is that regardless of where you sit on the political spectrum or what issues matter most to you, as in a person, Trump has the uncanny ability to bring everyone into the same footing, right? Be you a traditional conservative, I don't know if you're more, well, I presume you're more conservative leaning, but clearly not a MAGA right. So, him, leftist parts of the Democrats, the moderate Democrats, Europeans, the global South, everyone's like, stupidest decision. Like, I'm not pro the Islamic Republic, obviously, but I think Trump's, they seem more rational. It beggars believe the world we're in, whereby the Islamic Republic looks like a more rational actor than the Trump administration. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, absolutely agree. And that's the thing is President Trump started this war on false pretenses. And the false pretense was that Iran's leadership was crazy and suicidal. And as soon as they got a nuclear weapon, they would use it against Israel. They would, use it against the Middle East. They would nuke Europe. Then they would try to nuke the U.S. I mean, that whole idea is just so completely stupid and idiotic on its face. The fact is, nuclear deterrence works very well. It's worked with some of the worst, murderous, genocidal dictators in world history: Joseph Stalin, Mao Tse-tung, Kim Jong-il, and all of those, other dictators, and of course Kim Jong-un today. There was just no logic behind, the argument that a handful of Iranian nukes posed a greater threat than tens of, 20,000 Russian and Chinese and North Korean nukes. It's just really ludicrous. And it's just, I think you have to really be kind of an ideologue to believe that kind of nonsense, because there's no rationality to it. Basically 80% of the Trump voters are still hardcore MAGA. They believe all of Trump's lies about the war. I've always been an America First conservative. I strongly supported Trump's reelection. And I think during the first few months of his second term, he was really implementing a brilliant strategy. He was trying to have peace with Russia and China. He was trying to, plan to end our forever wars, primarily in Ukraine. He had pledged to not start any new ones. And basically, his entire presidency is unraveled over this Iran war mess that it's really an unnecessary war. It's a war that, his own, military and political advisors advised him not to start. But Netanyahu gave him all this, fake intel and sold him a bill of goods and said, you can win this war in a week. Iran will collapse like a house of cards, like Hitler thought the Soviet Union would. And it was all demonstrably false. And President Trump just, with his incredible narcissism and ego, thought that he would be the one president that could accomplish the defeat of Iran, and that history would remember him kindly. Instead, he's essentially trashed his entire presidential legacy over it.
So I'm going to sound like a therapist now, but how does that make you feel, David? Jokes aside, but how does that make you feel, and what does it do to your sense of Trump and the sort of right-leaning part of the US political spectrum like that? There seems to be two groups in the MAGA camp now, let alone more conventional conservatives or whatever pre-Trump's election in 2016 and so on. So how does someone in your position navigate this, feeling perhaps politically homeless?
Well, it's a crazy feeling, really, because, certainly I was always America first. I always opposed the neocons. Obviously, during the Iraq war is kind of when I felt a little politically homeless, in the Republican Party. But, there's a real strong sense of betrayal, because I believe President Trump would keep his word. He was an America first conservative president during his first term, largely scandal free. He avoided the neocon calls for him to fight a war with Iran during his first term. He didn't start any new wars, and that was really the kind of foreign policy that I'd always wanted. So, kind of a Reagan policy of peace through strength. No major wars. Reagan didn't fight any major wars. He started a war with Grenada. That war lasted a few days. He pulled us out of the Middle East after, the Beirut car bombing that killed 241 U.S. Marines in 1983. So, and he made peace with Russia. It was his decision to, begin arms control negotiations with, the Soviet Union and other just very friendly relations with Russia that caused them to give up their entire empire. We've never seen that throughout history where, a nation gave up their entire empire, voluntarily. It's usually happened through war, and they had 20 captive nations that they granted independence to, both within the Soviet Union and in Eastern Europe in the Warsaw Pact. So that just shows what can be accomplished with an America first foreign policy. And I've been calling for, peace with Russia over Ukraine. I've presented a number of different peace proposals. Istanbul Agreement, obviously, that would have been an amazing one for Ukraine that would have kept them in control of 93% of its territory, internationally recognized territory. Russia agreed to withdraw to its pre-war positions. But then, of course, Zelensky torpedoed that with that final peace deal was going to be signed on April 9th, 2022. But that's just an example of what Trump could have accomplished, because he did commit to, sign a peace deal with Russia over Ukraine within 24 hours of his presidency.
Yeah, I think I understand your overall point there. The START treaties of 1986. And the reduction of usage of medium range interballistic missiles was remarkable. That treaty expired earlier this year. Not many people know that, but both sides still seem to be adhering to the overall principles of it, although I prefer it to be signed in again. I don't know. I might differ with you slightly. I think the primary reasons the Soviet Union collapsed weren't really through American foreign policy. I think that was more through the dysfunctionality of the Soviet Union as a confederation. But certainly the Americans' pressure and ability to continually appeal to sort of the capitalistic sides was part of it. But when it comes to Iran, then, so what do you think the United States should be doing? Just capitulating? Wouldn't that be a permanent scar on the reputation of the United States military?
Well, I think there's two different options that President Trump has to get us out of this war. One, the most obvious one, of course, is to re-implement the 60-day ceasefire MOU. I think if he were to do that, even unilaterally, if he were to say, okay, the blockade's over, we're acting in good faith, we're re-implementing the 60-day ceasefire MOU. We'd like to extend that for, I would say indefinitely, not just for 30 days as provided under the terms of the MOU. Obviously, it's already expired, but basically, Iran has said that that's what their demands are. And they've added another demand, which is a full withdrawal of all U.S. troops out of the Middle East. I mean, Trump could counter and say, well, we'll withdraw our troops out of the Persian Gulf region. Although I'd love to see a full withdrawal out of the Middle East. Obviously keep our troops in Turkey, which is part of NATO, but all of our bases in Israel, Iraq, Syria, Jordan, Bahrain, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, all those, should be pulled. And in fact, there's, reports that I've seen is that, Trump has officially said he wants out of Iraq and Syria in terms of all our troops out of those two countries. And then reportedly, we're looking at a full withdrawal from Bahrain and Kuwait as well, because those military bases are largely destroyed. They're just too close to Iran. They're essentially indefensible. Iran has destroyed our THAAD radars that give us sufficient warning time to launch effective missile defenses. And obviously our missile defense interceptors are being expended. So that's one way. The other way is just, a unilateral withdrawal. And this is basically kind of General Flynn has advocated that, we pull our military forces out of the region, bring them home to the United States or the Western Hemisphere, and call it a strategic reset. And President Trump could accurately, he could credibly point to his national security strategy, which I think is outstanding, that he essentially threw in the trash when he started this war, and say this was all part of the plan. The plan was to, basically degrade Iran's military, eliminate the nuclear threat, which he really hasn't done at all, I would argue, but at least he's claiming that. And provide all these PowerPoints or whatever he wants to do, and have a victory parade in Washington D.C. or whatever he wants to do with that. But essentially declare victory, bring our troops home under the auspices of a strategic reset, and America first, and that would be putting America first, and it's what Joe Ken has been advocating as well. Which is, simply pull our military forces out of range of Iranian, medium range missiles, and end the war unilaterally. Looks like you're muted.
Thanks for that. Yeah, sorry, I mute myself because we've got a bit of construction or something. But no, we had Joe Kent on the show before. He was, it was great back and forth with him on certain things like that. But the question that I asked to him, and you've reminded me of as well, based on your point just now, is, can you adequately assume that by withdrawing all presence from the Middle East, that wouldn't though still be at risk of third parties wanting to interfere in American elections or American interests still? The concern I have with sometimes what I hear is that, sure, you can disengage, which is fine. I understand, you need to put your own house in order, which I agree with in many ways. If we look at the state of Europe or the UK in some ways, but by sort of internalizing too much, you assume that other countries won't still want to weaken you in other ways. So, America not engaging in Africa. Yeah, okay, you can do that, but that's not going to stop the Chinese and Russians from wanting to do stuff to undermine American interests anyway. So surely you should have a finger on the pulse still a little bit, just to counterbalance against your adversaries or rivals. Or you don't agree with that?
Well, I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding of what foreign policy, U.S. foreign policy should be. President Nixon famously stated that we want better relations with Russia than Russia has, with China, and better relations with China than China has with Russia. Because essentially, we want to prevent them from uniting. And essentially what we've done is it's our U.S. military presence on Russia's and China's borders and border seas that have pushed them into this alliance. And you might be right. In some ways it's an alliance of convenience. I mean, certainly historically, they have not been allies. They've been more often enemies than allies, but they've had They've resolved their border disputes. They've had massive military technological transfers, wealth, trade relations, security, economic cooperation. Obviously, the Beijing Olympics in February of 2022. President Xi Jinping and President Putin stated that this was a no limits partnership. It's that was greater than an alliance, and in many ways, I think it is. It's certainly a full scale alliance. Just like the NATO alliance with Article 5, just because a NATO country is at war doesn't necessarily mean the U.S. is obligated to go to war. So that's why explains why China hasn't declared war on Ukraine. Russia and China haven't declared war on the U.S. over the war in Iran. But essentially, what I'm saying is it's U.S. military forces deployed in the Middle East that got us into this war in the first place. If we didn't have any troops, in the Persian Gulf region, then this war would not have started because, as Secretary Rubio and President Trump himself have both stated, the reason we went to war is because we had credible intelligence that Israel was going to start a war against Iran. And Iran had said that if Israel attacks them, they would attack U.S. military bases in the region. If we didn't have any military bases in the region, we simply would not have got involved in that fight. And obviously, if we weren't allies with Israel, that entangling alliance would not have led us into war with Iran either. So those are the two, when Putin talks about, what are the core issues that started the war in Ukraine, the same thing applies to the war in Iran. We have to figure out what caused us, what caused President Trump and U.S. leaders to get us into this mess of a war. And those are really the two issues. So I would say we should cut our alliance with Israel completely, and we should also pull our troops out of the Middle Eastern region. And then we'll never have to deal with those conflicts ever again. And we can focus on exactly what you said, which is, defending against cyber attacks, election interference, nuclear missile strikes with the Golden Dome, hardening the grid against EMP attack, rebuilding our nuclear arsenal, as you and I have discussed on offline. Russia has, according to my estimates, up to 50 times more non-strategic nuclear weapons than we do. Some of those are sub-kilotons, so they're optimized for battlefield usage. We need to, but primarily we need to resolve the strategic nuclear imbalance. Russia and China together completely overmatch the U.S. in terms of our nuclear arsenal, not just in terms of quantity, but quality as well. So all of those issues should be what we're focusing on, not all these foreign military adventures that are, hurting us economically, militarily, and geopolitically.
Yeah, wow. There's goodness, quite a lot there to dissect. I think largely the technological advancement of hypersonics. The DoD admitted that I think 2 years ago almost, that they were notably behind in terms of application and usage. China's been proliferating nuclear arms for a while now, partially because I think they need more nuclear warheads to be seen as a great power, right? As much as it is for the materialistic use and application. But I think the reasons for the war startings are quite, they're sort of similar, but they're also different, right, David? I think that Trump's decision to go with Iran was largely based on his own grievances and manipulation by Netanyahu and Israel. I mean, you're saying to cut the relationship with Israel, at least from a sort of military standpoint, it's quite significant. But on the Ukrainian side, Putin has had these sentiments about NATO, but he's also had this ideological obsession about Ukraine and Russian resurgence and all that. So I think there's quite a lot of difference there. What I'm curious to hear from you then is sort of, okay, so if America is first in the policy, but how do you balance focusing on American interests, but not, as I say, isolating to such an extent that you that's also an overall loss, right? It is absolutism versus relativism here, and I think the United States needs to balance prioritizing its own issues versus not being so disengage from other areas, that it's a net negative for it as well. You know what I mean? How do you get that balance right?
Well, I think America First conservative foreign policy would essentially involve making all of our alliances, instead of ironclad, we make them conditional. So our alliance with NATO countries and other countries, Israel, would be conditional on whether it was in the U.S. national security interest to come to their defense in terms of starting a war or sending troops, or in the case of Israel, sending aircraft and missile interceptors to shoot down incoming missiles. None of our alliances, including, as I mentioned, the Atlantic Alliance with NATO, our NATO partners, we're just committed to, provide arms with them, provide some sort of military assistance. It doesn't necessarily require us to go to war. But if we improve relations, if we pull back our military forces from the borders of Russia and China, out of Eastern Europe, out of the Middle East, perhaps even out of Korea. I know that President Trump has expressed interest in pulling our troops out of South Korea. Then we can have better relations with Russia and China and even North Korea and Iran. Then we don't really need to have, spend 1.5 trillion on national defense. We can, and certainly we can put those dollars to better use, not on ongoing military operations and wars, endless wars in the Middle East, but use them on, strategic defense and, protecting against, nuclear missile attack and EMP attack, like I've mentioned. But that's really the key. Peace through strength means you actually try to have peace. If you're fighting all these wars, that's not peace, and it's not strength either, because we're wearing down our military readiness to make us incapable of being able to, fight or even perhaps deter aggression from China and potentially Russia as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think withdrawing the 30,000 so troops from the 38th parallel is, I don't know if that's a wise idea, because I think that North Korea genuinely is very, well, it is a threat to South Korea and South Korea's economy, the concerns over Japan's relationship as well. It's not, I mean, Taiwan as well. We had another expert on yesterday who was talking about a recent trip he'd had to Taiwan, and so I asked him, why should America bother defending Taiwan? Why should we risk an all-out war with China over an island? And his basic emphasis was that we don't really have a choice. Taiwan is such a bedrock of technological innovation and hub for everything that we take for granted in the West, or America specifically, and it's a full-fledged democracy, one of the only few in Southeast Asia. So that's a reason why we should defend Taiwan. What do you say to that? Is that overkill and not something that you'd say he's a more traditional neoconservative? So you would probably disagree with that quite a lot.
Well, up until 2010, I argued that we should that same thing, that the U.S. should agree to defend Taiwan, even if it means the potential nuclear annihilation of the U.S. in a war with China. But in terms of that argument, what they're saying, it's true. Well, it's true if we were to lose advanced semiconductors that are sold from Taiwan to the U.S. In terms of other, various products, it could cause a Great Depression. We go down by 8% in terms of our overall GDP. But if we go to war with China, we stand to lose 50% to 100% of our GDP. If the U.S. is annihilated as a country with a nuclear first strike from China, all of those concerns are, kind of dismissed. Plus the fact that China would be highly likely to continue selling us advanced microprocessors produced by Taiwan, just at a higher price, and of course, kind of in a monopoly position. So a Chinese takeover of Taiwan doesn't necessarily mean we'd lose the microprocessors. Of course, Taiwan TMC has plans. Reportedly, they've have plans, contingency plans, where they could destroy their plants to prevent them from falling into Chinese hands. The U.S. could also, stay neutral in an invasion scenario where China was invading Taiwan, but we could use missiles, launch missiles to take those out. So there's a lot of other options. It's in a perfect world where the U.S. has military supremacy, as we did over China, or superiority at least during the 1990s standoff. In 1996, the Taiwan Straits, when we sent a couple aircraft carriers in the Taiwan Strait region. That would obviously be the ideal position that I would love to see, but the correlation of forces have shifted very, in a very pronounced way against the United States and its allies in favor of the Sino-Russian military alliance. And we have to accept reality, and we have to, prioritize, U.S. Survival. Essentially, what I've advocated is I refer to a strategy of assured national survival, whereby the U.S. focuses, as I mentioned, on strategic, homeland, and hemispheric defense. That we transform from a global superpower to back to a hemispheric superpower as we were before World War II. And that doesn't mean we become an isolationist country. Obviously, we maintain some military base. We probably cut about half our military bases, maybe just under that, in terms of overseas military bases. But we pull back maybe 75% of our military forces from abroad, and deploy those for hemispheric defense. And I think that would promote a lot more peace and prosperity. It would certainly drastically reduce the risks of World War III, which currently I would assess as probably the highest it's ever been, with the potential for both the wars in Iran and the war in Ukraine to escalate to a global conflict.
Yeah, I mean, we saw the rumblings of that in the earlier part of the month, didn't we? But both Ukraine and Iran quickly sort of said they didn't want to escalate further. So maybe that spills over between the Russians and the Americans or the Chinese somehow. But it's all pretty messy out there. But David, thank you so much for your comments today. It's been very interesting hearing your perspective and arguments. And everyone watching, if you haven't already, check out David's work and writings on Substack. If you enjoy the conversation, then of course subscribe to both of us, and we'll see you all next time. But thanks very much for watching, and have a good weekend. Stay tuned.